Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Anthropology 415, 515, Ethnographic Methods. We are on September 16th. It is Monday of week 5, I believe. That's pretty nice. We're already getting into the semester. Let's take a look at the syllabus for those of you who can see the board. This is week 5 down here. You'll notice that I switched up the order of the chapters. Before we had been reading kind of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, 4, 5. You'll notice that if you're reading through an order, this is where it gets kind of crazy. We're going to jump to chapter 13 and 14 for the next 2 weeks because I want you to get started on your participant observations. Bernard has it. He has a whole big lead up. It's like a student paper where you'll spend half of the book leading up to what you want to actually get to. But this is my favorite part, and I want to get to it. And that way you also can. They're often take a little bit while to get set up, or students don't like. I don't want students put off to the end. So I moved it forward so you can get started on that. This will start part 2 of the class. Part 1 is a little dry. I'm sure you found it dry. I found it a little dry, talking about like theories of research and how we build research projects and all that. And that's probably not what you signed up for. What you signed up for was like, how do I actually do this, right? And that's what we're going to be doing from here on out. So we'll do this early on in the semester. So when you get to evaluations, you've completely forgotten about Bernard's structural analysis of different types of research designs. So this week we're talking about basically field work from here on out, participant observation, and then kind of as a complement, field notes next week, which is going to be you'll do your first participant observation as homework this week. We'll look at that in a second, and kind of your second one next week, and write about it through your field notes. Then we'll do digital ethnography or participation and observation in digital spaces. We'll have test 1. And we'll do a bunch more methods like interviewing, surveys, questionnaires, cultural domain analysis, textual analysis, and then coding in the second after the midterm. So from here on out, I think it's pretty fun. We're going to have a lot of activities. This week I'll be lecturing a little bit more, but pretty much from here on out, after that, we'll start doing like more hands-on kind of stuff. You'll have a chance to interview each other. You'll have a chance to go to the library next week, and we'll observe the natives there and write field notes about them and stuff like that. So we'll see how that goes. This week we have discussion board number 5, homework number 4, and quiz number 3. Remember, we only have 10 of each, 10 discussion boards, 10 quizzes, 10 homeworks. So we are underway this semester, right? Get those points if you're a little bit behind. Remember that I'm a softie and I accept things. So please turn them in. I'll give you some points, right? Not like some of these professors. So hard, right? Let's look at what we're doing this week. We got I want to actually look at the quiz and discussion board first, and then I want to spend a little bit more time on the homework here after a little bit. Oh, that's not the right week. Where are we? Go back up. Here we go. So, do you all have a pretty good idea of what your project is about at this point? At least topically, what are we doing? Let's yell it out.
UFOs.
UFOs. Superstitions. There's only 2 more of you. You can just yell. Ghost. La Llorona. So we got ideas, right? That's great. That is step 1. If you don't have an idea at this point in the class, it's time. It's time to pick something, right? Like, it may not be the best, but you got to pick something. At this point in the semester, like I said, part 1 through 4, part of the reason I do kind of go over that stuff in the beginning is it gives you not only kind of here's like the big ideas about research, but it lets you think about like these things and be like, oh, do I want to study ghost or do I want to study Bigfoot? Like, oh, I'm going to take a few weeks and think about this. But at this point, we're in week 5, we got to roll. So we're going to start actually doing research on this topic, right? So your participant for participant observation, your discussion board number 5 is going to ask you questions like, in the context of this topic that you picked, right? Not like something else or ideally, but like, what are 2 like events or activities that you could actually go and do participant observation at? You might say, what is participant observation? You're in luck. I have 3 days to tell you what that is. But think about where are some things that you could actually participate and observe, right? And it's not enough to just be like, I'm going to go to Albuquerque and ask about La Llorona. Like that's part of it. But like, I'm going to go to, they're having this Dia de los Muertos festival coming up, and there's La Llorona stuff associated with that. So I'm going to go to a storytelling at the library, and I'm going to go to Old Town, and they do like a reenactment or something like that, right? The more specific, the better, because you actually got to do these things instead of like in the undergrad or in the introduction class. It's like, what would be the coolest thing you could ever do? And you're like, I want to go to like study blimp makers or something like that. And you're like, well, that's something, but like in this one, it should be something that you hopefully at least attempt to do, right? Like things fall apart all the time, but this should be something that in a good faith effort you're going to attempt to do because you need to do participant observations for your paper, right? So if you go back to the paper outline, you'll see that for undergrads, we're going to do at least 5 participant observation events, 2 of those in person, 2 of them virtual, and your 5th one can be an option play for either one. And for grads, you're doing 8 to 10 with at least, again, 2 in person, 2 virtual. So for this discussion board, think about this, what 2 you might pick. Remember, it's got to be in the scope of the semester. It's got to be before your paper's due. So don't be like, I'm going to go to the 2032 Olympics or something like that. Like it's too far out. Think about not only what these events are, but how you might access them. Like I'm going to access the Old Town Parade in Albuquerque is open to anyone. So it's pretty easy to get to. But I also want to interview and, I want to also participate in the parade. That's a little more tricky, right? I want to march in the parade. So how am I going to do that? I have to like figure out a float or I have to like contact somebody and see how I can be involved. Think about what challenges you might have, right? People might not want to talk to you about this topic, or it might be difficult to kind of access this community or something like that, right? I want to study, I want to study beliefs in skinwalkers among Navajo communities. That's a cool project, but like I, as a white dude living in Portales, and I need to complete this project by, like November, probably don't have time to travel up to Shiprock over and over and like get myself embedded in the community and like get people to know me and like, get beyond the initial pleasantries where they're actually talking about like scary ghosts and skinwalkers and stuff, right? So is this kind of feasible? And then finally, what could these events tell you about your research question? Why are we, so the why question, why do it? Why spend your time and effort, going to parade in Albuquerque or going to participate in this ceremony or this ritual? How does this add to what you're going to know about your project? Okay. And basically for your homework, you're going to be doing that, right? So if your discussion question this week is, what are 2 things you could do? Your homework is go do one of those. It doesn't have to be one of those 2, but go do something, right? Again, this is up until now, your first 3 homeworks have been like, imagine a project, right? Or come up with some variables or write, an IRB for what you're going to do. But like now you actually got to do some stuff, which is kind of exciting for some people and scary for others. This is like what I love about this class is because it's not just like talking about methods. We're actually going to go do them. And you get to learn not only about your topic, but a little bit about yourself. You'd be like, I'm the kind of person who loves participant observation, or I just cannot stand doing life history interviews, or pile sorts are weird, or I just love the pile sort game. Like I'm always conducting those when I'm in the field, or something like that. So for this homework, you're going to conduct this week at least 1 participant observation event. We're going to talk at length at like 60 slides about participant observation. So you're going to learn quite a bit about that. Remember, you're going to need at least 5 total if you're an undergrad, 2 in person, 2 online, plus another option play. And then, grad students, again, 8 to 10. So what you're going to do, this is very similar to kind of the intro to cultural anthropology thing I do with students to get them just like practicing participant observation. This is your very first one. The main goal is to like get you out there and get you doing something, right? It may not be the best, but you've started, right? And it's in many ways doing field work or doing ethnography or doing participant observation is like doing exercise. It may not be the best metaphor for everybody, but for some people, it's a good metaphor, right? The first day you go to exercise, it's terrible and it sucks, but like you need to like start sometime because there's always going to be a first time, or learning any new skill is difficult your first couple act times, but it's really important just to kind of jump in and start doing it because after a while, you're going to like start building up and you'll get that kind of muscle memory built up where it's easy. So number 1, you're going to select an event to observe and ideally participate in. It can be something common, small, frequent, or elaborate, unusual, and different, right? Don't do something illegal. Do something that you, because I'm not going to come bail you out of jail if you're like, oh, my professor said, I was observing, I wanted to participate and observe with the culture of Breaking Bad in Albuquerque. So I was slinging crystal and got arrested. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to write you a note for your for your lawyer. So please do something legal. Please do something that you have access to and permission to be there, right? I want to study this Maya ceremony, but if they're like, gringos stay home, like I'm not going to like sneak into the ceremony and like look over the wall, right? Like it's not allowed. You're just going to make it worse for yourself and for future researchers in that community. You want to pick something that's not familiar to you, right? So if you pick something that's like, oh, I'm just used to this every day, like I went to my own church, right? It's probably not the best thing. Why? Right? Even if you're studying life after death, why shouldn't you just go to your own church? Right? They do have life after death in church, and that's a good topic, but like, why not your own church? Why maybe somebody else's church? Yeah, new perspectives, right? If you go to your own church, probably you know the pastor and you know the people you sit with. And you always sit in the same seat and you always go to the same restaurant afterwards. And it's like you just kind of get in a rut. But if you go somewhere new, like, oh, I'm Baptist, I went to Catholic church. Everything seemed really weird and different, and they're doing it in different order, and they're standing up and sitting down different times. There's different people talking to me. So it just gets you out of your comfort zone. Again, it's part of being an ethnographer is to get you out of your comfort zone. It should be something you're interested in, you're curious about. If you don't have any kind of curiosity about it, it's going to be a really boring time for you, right? You should be like interested. So you got to pick a project, and I tried to make the topics just like as cool, I guess, is like I could be, right? Like you're not studying like last time we studied the water issues in eastern New Mexico. It's kind of just depressing, right? Everybody was like, oh, there used to be water and now there's not. Everyone's like sad. But like now you can pick pretty much any of these cool topics that you want. So if you're not curious about it at this point, like, I'm sorry, like these are cool topics. You should be interested. And ideally, you should find some in. There are instances where like I went to Belize by myself and like just like some boomer like started shaking hands and being like, I'm Eric Stanley. I'm here to like work. Tell me what you want me to do, right? Can you give me a job with the Cacao Growers Association? They're like, sure. Probably not the best way of doing it. It did work out, but it's better if you have like a friend, right? Meet some people, get acquaintances, and then have them kind of introduce you, right? So if I want to go to this church and I want to study ideas about life after death, instead of just like walking in randomly, I might be like, hey, my friend goes over to that church. I might accompanying them sometime. It makes it feel less weird, but it also is a great source of like kind of backstage information. You'd be like, who is that person up on stage talking, right? Or why do those people why do all the women sit on that side and all the men sit on this side or something like that, right? You can ask questions instead of just being like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder. So that's what we call a key informant. We're going to talk more about field notes next time and the difference between like writing field notes versus jotting versus a diary. But just kind of as like a little spoiler alert, when you go to this event, bring like a little notebook or a piece of paper and so you could write things down. What kind of things might you want to write down? You're not going to be like writing in longhand, like today begins my journey into the study of the Loch Ness Monster. I am currently sitting in the church, St. Helen's Church, right? Why am I not like writing, if I'm not writing things out kind of longhand, what am I actually writing in my little notebook? What kind of stuff might I write? Especially if it's like not full sentences. What was that?
Observation.
Observations. Oftentimes it's like a count, like, since doing participant observation, I always count things. Like I'll count how many people are in an event, and I'm pretty good at estimating at this point, right? I go to an ASAB event and be like, oh, there's 75 people here. I might write that down, right? Because it's an actual like observation, and later I might not remember it. I might also write down someone's name, right? Like who's that dude wearing all black with the little thing, the priest up there, right? What's his name? Father, whatever, right? Because maybe I need to talk to him later, and I don't want to be like, hey, Father, which you can get away with, but it works better if you actually have people's names. Other things you might want to write down are like key quotes. Like if somebody said something that's like really, pertinent, like, my life changed when I first saw the Loch Ness Monster. Even if I'm not recording or something, I'm just going to write that down and probably who said that, just so when I come back to it later, right? Write notes about all that kind of stuff that you're going to do, but do it unobtrusively, right? Now people get weird if you're like have a clipboard a notepad and I'm like writing, I'm like observing you, like I'm at the zoo, like watching you. People are gonna be like, what are you doing? And they're gonna like change their behavior, right? So I like to keep one of those like little tiny notebooks in my pocket. Or I just do it on my phone now. I have like the Notes app, which probably you have, and just like type random words that don't make sense to anybody else, but like later I'll see it and be like, oh, you know, Loch Ness Monster changed my life. And I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember what that, and just to kind of like jog your memory. Um, Make sure, try to participate, right? If you're going to go to church as your event, don't just stand in the back, right, with your notebook and observe again like monkeys at the zoo. Sit in the pews, sing the song, stand up, sit down, kneel, do all the things, right? Go to lunch with people afterwards. Be part of the community. If I want to go study, if I'm studying sports at ENMU, I'm going to study sports teams or something like that as a project. We had a student last time do that water, looking at differences in different teams and how they acted around water and stuff like that, right? It's not enough just to observe them, right? Go and, if I want to know why track people drink more water than, soccer people or something like that, that was like one of their theses. You can't really know that until you like go out for a day and run with the track people and then go out for a day and play soccer with the soccer people, right? And you can kind of see how it is and you can feel it like in this kind of embodied sense, and have a much better idea than if I'm just looking, right? Um, it's not always possible, right? Sometimes those things are outside of your control, but ideally it should be observing and participating as well. We'll talk about that in the lectures this week. And then it's often good, like I said, to have a key informant. So either during, you can kind of whisper, like, hey, what's going on? I don't really understand. I did that in Maya church all the time because it's all in Maya. In the beginning, I just had no idea what was going on. So I'd ask, hey, what's going on? What are they talking about? As you like kind of figure things out, you'll be more, but it's still good to like debrief afterwards, right? So like if you can like either with yourself or your key informant, like kind of process the situation, like what actually just happened here, and like what are the big themes or what are some of the important things that happened, who's did what and why, right? And then you're going to answer these questions. It's like 5 questions. It's pretty easy. What groups or people were represented at this activity? What happened at the activity? This is like almost like you're a newspaper reporter. Sights, sounds, smells, taste, tactile memories, right? So if you went to the Halloween events in Albuquerque Old Town, right? It's not just like they had like Halloween, it's like purple and orange pumpkins, right? But you can talk about, oh, I ate this food, or like you could smell the incense in the air, or you could like, I went to this parade and people were like pressed against me and it was like really crowded or something like that. Or I went to this ritual and they started playing drums and this dead person raised up in the air and started dancing, right? Like from Grendel, if you remember. So figure that out as well. We'll do virtual projects next week. But remember, you can, or in 2 weeks, we'll talk more about that. Remember, you can do in person or virtual, but you're going to have to do both. And whatever one you don't do now, you're just going to end up doing later. What activity, how did you feel during the activity? And what conversations did you have? And this is usually direct quotes and versus summary, right? Try to get as many direct quotes because oftentimes how people talk is really interesting. It's not just that like, oh, they said Black Myth Monster is really important. They were talking like, whatever phrases they use or turn the phrase or things like that. Often are really important because you can kind of analyze, right? Again, if somebody calls it, ghost, I saw a ghost versus like I saw an evil spirit versus I was possessed by an evil spirit, right? Those are kind of the same things, but they mean really different and often like indicate that this person had a very different experience. And then finally, kind of think about the rules of social norms and behaviors. What are people doing? How do they interact with each other? What are kind of the written and unwritten rules of that encounter? Okay, so that's your homework for this week. And then you're going to also do 3 questions, which we'll talk about over the course of this lecture. How does a researcher's positionality shape the research process for ethnographers working in communities other than their own? Give at least 3 examples. We'll talk about this idea of objectivity versus subjectivity. How does subjectivity impact the ethnographic process? Is ethnographic subjectivity a problem that must be overcome? Is it even possible to be strictly objective in your participant observations? What do you think? Yeah, you can't, right? Spoiler alert. And then finally, what are the most important steps to take in preparation for field work? What do you do before you go? Then we'll talk about once you're actually there. This is, this is kind of more for your dissertation or something long term, but we can still talk about these different stages of entering, of gaining trust, and then eventually taking your break, coming back, and then leaving. And then what are the challenges and opportunities at each stage? So all cool things to talk about this week. Switch over to any questions about that before we get into the lecture. It's a long lecture, so it'll take a while to get through it. Okay, participant observation. Here we go. Okay. When we talk about cultural anthropology, this is what often comes to people's mind, right? You probably, even if you didn't really know what cultural anthropology was before, like an intro to anthro class, but if you've taken the intro to anthro class, probably you've seen the pictures of Malinowski or Evans Pritchard with like the khaki and the pith helmet and like, the only white dude for hundreds of miles living in a native community, right? For long periods of time, oftentimes like adopting the dress or the garb of the local people, speaking kind of their language, at least giving it a shot, participating in everyday life, rituals and agriculture and all that kind of stuff, right? Like the kind of classic cultural anthropologist, almost like, and again, this is kind of like a stereotype in the way that like Indiana Jones is a stereotype of archaeologist, like someone probably has like a vague idea or took a class one time when they made this perception, but like that's kind of the distance. Because today people are doing participant observation in all kinds of communities, right? Everything from like the traditional village and random middle of nowhere to like people like Karen Ho doing her natives are Wall Street bankers in New York City. So right, very different kind of garb and customs that you're going to have to participate and observe with when you're working with Wall Street bankers than if you're with Maya farmers. It's super important for us, and it's really the hallmark of cultural anthropology that sets it apart from the other subdisciplines in anthropology, right? So archaeologists are concerned about like material remains and excavations as their primary method, surveys and analysis. Biological anthropologists looking at bones and analyzing that. What we're doing in cultural is studying living people, and the way we do that is participant observation. It also sets us apart from disciplines like sociology or psychology, which are more focused on interviews or surveys or things like that. That is part of cultural anthropology, and those disciplines have kind of adopted participant observation. But for them, it's like secondary or additional, right? It gives you context for your surveys or your interviews. Versus in cultural, right? Participant observation is going to be the main deal that we're doing, and then the other stuff is kind of an outgrowth, right? So while you're doing participant observation in a Maya community, I'm going to do interviews, or I will do a survey or something like that. But I'm not doing like the interviews first and then being like, now I'm going to go live here and see what it's all about. Participant observation is about getting close to people, getting yourself in a community. And it's partly why I like it the best of all the methods, right? Because you do get to insert yourself into this whole new community. And whether that is Maya chocolate farmers in Belize, or it's UFO enthusiasts in Roswell, or people who are folk curers in Albuquerque or something like that, right? This should be something you're interested in. So, and getting a new kind of slice of life is really important to what we do as anthropology, right? You get to see life from a different perspective. And anthropology, especially in cultural, right? It's kind of that old saying of like, you never know what it's like to be someone until you walk a mile in their shoes, right? You've all heard that. It's like that in anthropology. It's not, you don't know what it's like to be a chocolate farmer until you've done it for a year or two or something like that. You can't read a book, you can't interview people, you can't do a survey to tell you what it's going to be like to farm chocolate. It's going to be like getting on the horse at 5:30, riding out to your farm, working all day in the hot sun, getting sick frequently, and then you really kind of like internalize what it's like, right? And so again, cultural anthropology and participant observation often is, in cultural, we think it's the awesomest thing. But in other places, right, it's like, oh, other disciplines might be like, it's kind of subjective, right? It's not really science or anything like that. But Bernard, it makes this case, and I think it's pretty strong that, right, this is a way to gather effective positivist knowledge, like actual knowledge, quantitative and qualitative data, which you wouldn't be able to access from just interviews or surveys or questionnaires or anything else. So, right, it's a unique type of research methodology. It's the primary one we do, or at least the king or queen of them in cultural anthropology, and it's often misunderstood. That's my intro. Okay. There's often this tendency to romanticize participant observation among cultural anthropologists, and it's like a ritual among anthropologists. Like if you ever go to the AAAs, or if you ever see when like we're hiring somebody and they bring in a cultural anthropologist, they'll always talk about their field work. Like, where'd you study? How long were you there? Right? What'd you do? What's some crazy thing that happened to you in the field? Right? They'll trade stories. Almost in the way that if you've ever seen the old movie Jaws, right? This is my favorite scene in there, where you have these two old-time sailors comparing scars from shark attacks, right? So that's kind of what cultural anthropologists like to do. But that doesn't mean that it's not valid, right? Or that it's overly romanticized or something like that. This is like an important part of our tradition, but it's also part of our identity as who we are as cultural anthropologists. A lot of your legitimacy as a cultural anthropologist is being able to do this kind of long-term field work and then have answers to questions that can only be gained from being somewhere for a very long time and having a very intimate understanding of the culture, the tradition, right? Yeah. Oftentimes, like we said, there's this kind of stereotype about participant observation being far away, right? Getting on a boat, Levi-Strauss on a boat for a month or something like that. Learning a new language often never written down, or getting some serious tropical illness. But ethnography happens, and participant observation is happening all around us, right? You as researchers are going to be in communities all over. If you don't get the tropical disease, don't worry, we'll still count it as and give you an A in this class. Okay, so a lot of what we talk about in doing research methods is quantitative versus qualitative. And when we do participant observation, it's both, right? Qualitative research is pretty easy to see when we're doing it. And we'll talk more about this when we do field notes next week, but right, those kind of questions in your homework this week, like you went to a curing ceremony, for somebody in Albuquerque, they were use the egg to like take the bad spirits out of you. And a lot of that is going to be very descriptive, right? What are the smells in the house? What is the words that person said? What are the prayers that they used? What was kind of the affective impact on that person? But we also do quantitative data when we're doing participant observation as well, right? So when I was doing participant observation of Maya farmers in Belize, a lot of it was like, what's it like to be a Maya farmer, right? Or what is cacao farming like, right? How has the industry changed over time? Or what are the biggest challenges you're facing today, right? Those are all very qualitative kind of answers. But I also ask a lot of quantitative questions too. How many trees do you have? Right? That is a quantitative kind of, I have 700 trees. How many acres is your farm? It's 2.4 acres. How many pounds of chocolate did you sell last year? I sold 736 pounds of chocolate. Right? Those are all quantitative questions that I gained during participant observation, right? You could have done this through other methods or other means, but participant observation doesn't limit you from doing quantitative. You'll also want to collect data beyond just like writing field notes, and you all have cameras on your phones now. So take pictures, right? That's a great way of documenting things. A picture's worth 1,000 words. And so oftentimes I take a picture of something if I needed to remember it, right? So, I wanted to take a picture of a map because I wanted to see where we're going, or a picture of a sign because I wanted to think about it later, or a book or a brochure, or here's some people that I went to the farm with today. You might also take pictures of houses or buildings or churches or whatever, right? Whatever you're doing. And this can be both information like in your project, like here, I went to this curing ceremony and here's the building where it took place, but it can also help just jog your memory as kind of a resource. We'll also talk about audio recordings and recording people, especially when we do interviews. You want to do that. Increasingly now we do video too. Before, back in the day, you had to like bring an old camera and do that. But now your phone is also a camera and a video thing, so we can record video. Any of those kind of things, we'll do interviews. Pretty much all the methods that we'll do for the remainder of the class, whether it's interviews, pile sorts, textual analysis, anything like that, you can do while you're doing participant observation. This can all be kind of packed in together. Yep, we talked about that. When we do participant observation, it's not just that, right? It's not just collecting data. A lot of times what you're going to do is to participate and observe, right? That's in the title. And that's all about immersing yourself in a culture. And whether that is, again, a Maya community and beliefs, or you're a local church here in Portales. What are some ways that you could work to get yourself integrated into a community? And again, community on whatever scale you want to talk about. How might I get myself in, as anthropologists might say? Somebody in the chat, maybe? I heard a being. What's some ways we can do that?
Participating in events such as baptisms, going to feasts, meetings, anything to involve with the community, and then get more comfortable with you as a person. And get confidence in you. So
let's do it in a mock example. I'm sending you all to study the natives, the Greyhound natives of Eastern New Mexico University. But you aren't students here, right? We are outside researchers. What are some ways that we could integrate ourselves into this community versus just observing the greyhounds as if they were in the zoo? Yeah, we'll go to school events, right? Like what? Yeah, I was thinking that too. Go to casino night or go to the painting night or something like that, right? Why would that help get you into a community? It's not like you just go to casino night and suddenly they give you your student ID and they say, welcome, you're a Greyhound now. But how might that get you in the community to participate? Yeah, you'll be surrounded by the people, and so you'll get to hear how people are talking, what they're talking about. Like when I started doing my research in Belize, I didn't have a topic really. But what I did was I planted myself in a community for a month during my pre-field, and I was just asking people, hey, what's going on here? Like, what's the big news? Or I just listened to people when people were complaining or gossiping or things like that. You just kind of around it. The other thing it does is it puts you in that context, right? You don't get to just see people, but people see you. If you go to one event, people are like, oh, that's kind of weird. That person's there. I've never seen them before. But if you go to two, they're like, oh, three or four, they start to they recognize you. And then they'll probably start talking to you and invite you over and be like, hey, I've seen you for a while. What's your deal? What are you doing here? What do you want to do? And so kind of putting ourselves in those situations is really a great way of doing it. It's one of my favorite things about being a participant, doing ethnography and participant observation is just the feeling that you just got to go do these things, right? I'm maybe more naturally shy and wouldn't just put myself into situations, but being this is the thing I got to do, right? And kind of forces you outside of your comfort zone. What's something else you could do? So going to events, that's a real big one. Whether that's weddings and baptisms in Maya Village, or it's casino night and painting with a swirl among the natives of Eastern New Mexico. What's another strategy I could use besides immersing myself in activities? Yeah, talk to people, engage with people, right? Again, it's not enough to just go to one of these events and just sit by yourself and not talk to anybody. Interact, right? Talk to people. And this is, again, it's sometimes the most scary part. Some people really have an easier time with the interview because you have this list of questions you can kind of hide behind, or you have a camera and you're recording your tape recorder, right? And there's this cultural distance between you and your subjects. But just talk to people and just be friendly and be like, hey, I really am interested in this topic and I'm just kind of here to learn, or I'm here to just hang out and learn more about what's going on here. Part of talking to people, though, is learning a new way of speaking. And again, this can either be, I'm going to a place where they speak a completely different language from what I'm used to and I have no idea what's going on, to even going, if I go to the cub and I'm studying the natives of the cub, there's I'm a professor at Eastern and these are students at Eastern, right? But there is a cultural difference between students and professors in the way we talk. Maybe I have to like learn the lingo and all the slang that people are using today. So I don't like, date myself or something like that. And again, it's part of getting yourself invested or embedded in a community. This is like a really old way of doing things. This is probably just a little over probably 100 years old as a method, the main method in cultural anthropology. Bronislaw Malinowski, kind of from the British tradition in the Trobriand Islands. You probably remember this from Introduction to Cultural, as well as Franz Boas from kind of the German American side of this tradition, both kind of emphasizing participant observation. So if you remember way back to Intro to Cultural, I got that video. It's like 2-minute silent video where it's like, back in the early days, they did armchair anthropology. Somebody reading a book, like, and then they decided they should go and do veranda anthropology, where I'm going to travel across the ocean, but I'll stay in the mission or the fort, or I'll stay in the outpost, or even a hotel, which seems like a nice way of doing it, and have the natives come up to the veranda, right on the porch. I will interview them. I will observe their ways from a distance, but I, will retreat to the safety of my room with my tea and my field notes at the end of the day. And then beginning kind of in the 1910s, 1920s, participant observation became the main way of doing things in anthropology. Bronislaw Malinowski, right, is famous. He was going to do kind of veranda style anthropology in the same way that like his predecessors, like W.H.R. Rivers did, right? They'd go to this place and you set up in the trade post or something like that, and you do your little experiments, right? Like I want to understand the kinship of this group, right? So I'm going to make kinship charts and I'll ask people questions, but then I won't like really be integrated in the community. This is kind of a famous anthropology story. Malinowski was going to go do that. World War I broke out. He was a Polish. He was of Polish descent, but it was not, at the time, Poland wasn't really a country. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but he was studying in Britain, which was, if you know anything about World War I, they were on opposite sides of the war. He got to Australia and they were like, we don't really know about you. You're not like, you may be a spy or something like that. So we're gonna we're not gonna let you do this research. And he's like, but please, I've come all this way. And he got lots of letters from his professors and from his colleagues to be like, this dude is not a spy. Please do not arrest him. And they were like, okay, we won't arrest you, but you can't live with the team. You can't live in the outpost because maybe you'll be spying. We're gonna let you go to this remote island and you can stay there. And it's not jail, but we're just gonna kind of leave you there for a couple of years until this whole war thing gets sorted out, and then we'll come back and check, right? So they put him in the Trobriand Island, and instead of having kind of the British homies to hang out with in your fort or in the trade post, he was all alone, right? And he had to learn the language. He basically went and set up his tent in the middle, right in the main downtown of this village, and started just kind of doing what people were doing, right? Started going to farms, started eating the same foods, right? Started speaking the language. And all this was really different from what people had done before, right? If you were doing veranda, I'm going to have my, fish and chips or whatever British people were eating at the time. And no, that strange food over there, I'm sure it's a cultural delicacy, but it's not for my refined palate, right? And oftentimes, veranda anthropology was done through an interpreter, right? Because those people weren't there for very long. They only come for a few weeks. And how can you learn Trobriand in a few weeks? You probably can't, right? You can get a few vocab words, but that's probably all you're going to do. But because Malinowski was kind of shipwrecked there for 2 years, he had plenty of time to learn the language, and there was no other white people around for him to be like, oh, thank God I can speak English again. All his interactions had to be through this. And so it allowed him to do much better research than just going through interpreters. Why would that be? And interpreters are interpreting, right? They are translating, but what might be the problem? Even if in a perfect translation, right? Notwithstanding the fact that maybe they're going to Jose's, I'm sure you've seen this, Jose, when we've done, we use interpreters. Someone will talk for 30 minutes and the interpreter will be like, yeah, they said that, Ghosts are scary or something like that. And you're like, well, what about all the rest, right? Even if you got a perfect one-to-one translation, why might that be not enough to just keep using interpreters? What was Malinowski's big innovation there with speaking the local language? Yeah, miss out on the context. What else is going on? What else is going on when you don't have your interpreter around? You're like, yeah, there's all these people talking and I don't really understand. You might also, there might be some kind of misinterpretation. Do you know what the game of telephone is? What's that? What's the game of telephone? Yeah, you whisper to somebody else and then they whisper the same phrase to somebody else and it goes down the line. And then it gets to the very end of the line and what happens? It's like the joke of the game. It's completely different, right? And so the more people you have kind of in between your original source, like there's this one interview where, someone was speaking in Quechua and then it got translated to Mopan and then that got translated to Spanish and then it gets translated to English. And every step along the way, that person's changing it a little bit, adding their own little embellishments or taking things away. And so by the time you get it, it's been, it's losing its connection to what's actually going on. But yeah, and he says this is Malinowski was really not only famous for his contributions to economic anthropology about the couleurs, stuff about magic, but methodologically, this was a big thing too. And he wrote about, right, that doing participant observation in this kind of long-term way is really important because it helps get you past these kind of barriers of entry, right? People get used to you, they get accustomed to your presence, and you get access to more and more kind of backstage stuff, right? When you first roll into a community, whatever that is, whether it's a church or a village or whatever, people are probably going to put their best foot forward, right? Have that kind of outward facing, this is all great, everything's perfect here, like we all get along kind of thing. But what happens after you stay a little bit in a community? Or you get embedded a little bit? What do you think happens, Jose?
You're tired.
Now, what happens to the facade of?
Oh, it just goes away.
Yeah.
Normal thing. You go through research in the beginning, but yeah, it's so cool. I'm doing all my interviews. It's so fun. You think, and then you do the same thing over and over and over.
Well, I was thinking from the other perspective too, but for other people, right? The people there get used to you as well, right? Like you get used to it, but they get used to you, right? And it starts being weird, and they start telling you the good gossip, right? Because in the beginning they want to be like, oh yeah, everybody just gets along here, and after a while, it's like, that guy or that person, like I didn't really know about you in the beginning. I thought you might be a spy or something, so I didn't want to tell you this, but like now you're in, right? Yeah. When Malinowski went to, this is interesting aside about notes and queries, right? And I have my own very own copy of notes and queries. And this was kind of like standard issue when we, back in the day when people went into the field. And it's like a book of questions, right? So if you want to study in it, and it's coded, and we'll talk about coding a little bit later, right? But say I'm studying religions, right? I can basically look at all the things in this book and kind of start to figure out figure out about that society. Like, what are their ideas about sacred persons, animals, or plants? What is the sanctity of different kinds of places? What are the different kinds of rituals they use? Do they have individual cults? Do they have ritual experts? What the ritual experts do, right? And so that's kind of often how early anthropologists kind of started doing participant observation. And I think it's kind of a cool book still to keep around. Okay, when we talk about participant observation, this is probably the last thing we're going to do. The term itself is interesting in that, like, it's kind of this interesting middle ground, right? Participant observations. It's really two things that don't necessarily go together, right? And Malinowski's genius, I guess, is to kind of force them together, right? Because on one hand, you have the complete observer, and this is the easiest one to kind of think of, right? I think this is, if you were a primatologist and you were going to study the lemurs at the zoo over here in Clovis, right? You would sit at the bench and you would take your notebook and you might take notes about, I'm studying how many times these lemurs shared food with each other and which monkeys or which lemurs shared food with each other, right? I'm going to sit on the bench and I'm going to take notes, right? Lemur 2 gave to lemur 3 a banana today. Lemur 4 gave lemur 1 an apple, and lemur 5 didn't get food from anybody, or something like that. That's a complete observer. I'm not actually doing anything. There's a physical space, or at least either physical or a virtual space between me and what's going on, and I'm trying not to affect the situation at all. On the complete other end, that's 100% observation, 0% participation. The other end is 100% participation and 0% observation. What would that look like? Yeah, and not writing anything down, not doing actually. This is like what we would call going native, right? I had something often case something traumatic's happened in my life, and I've run away to Belize. Right? There's these weird expats who live there. Jose's met them, I'm sure. They're like slightly too sunburned, and slightly too much money, and slightly to think they know what's going on slightly too much. But oftentimes they'll just like embed themselves in a community and just be like, I'm a Maya farmer now. Like, and like, we're not doing research or not like thinking about it, they're just like doing, right? I built, Chris Nisbet with his house up in, Maya Mountain Research Farm or something like that, right? I'm just going to do this thing, or I'm just gonna, I'm learning about being a curandero. So I'm just going to focus on learning about doing this, but I'm not actually like writing anything down or taking any notes. What we're going to do instead is right in the middle, right? We are going to participate in these events. We're going to put ourselves fully out there. We're going to, if I'm going to study the wiffle ball team at Eastern New Mexico, I want to go out there and I want to hit some wiffle balls with them. But it's not enough just to play the game, right? I got to actually like write notes when I'm done and be like, I observed there were 7 players on the team and we played this other team, and afterwards we went out and got pizza, and then there's a feeling of camaraderie or something like that. So that's what we want to do. We want to participate, make sure we're actually doing it, and we're not just like watching the monkeys at the zoo, but we also want to make sure that we are writing down data from whatever we do. Okay, that's only 7 slides into it of like 60. So we will continue this discussion next time, but hopefully that's a nice transition from the more like theoretical side of the class. So from here on out, we're going to be talking about methods. So come back next time and we'll keep talking about participant observation. All right, thanks so much for hanging out. I'll see you next time.